Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
When you first meet the man who will define so much of your future without even knowing it, you do not expect him to slap you across the face with his words before you have even finished your damn coffee. I was 23, barely making it as a construction site manager, scraping together enough every month to keep my beat-up truck running and maybe take Emily out to a place that did not smell like stale beer and fryer grease. I loved her, no, scratch that, I needed her like air. She had this light inside her, something fierce and untouchable, and when she looked at me, it was like for a second I was more than some guy with dirt under his nails and dreams too big for his wallet. The first time I met Ronald Pierce, Emily's father, was at some backyard barbecue he threw together last minute, supposedly to welcome me to the family. His backyard was straight out of a catalog. Perfect green grass, gleaming grill station, a pool shaped like a damn kidney bean surrounded by manicured rose bushes. I showed up in my best jeans and a clean polo shirt, gripping a six-pack of local beer like a goddamn idiot who thought this was going to be easy. He spotted me right away, standing stiff by the folding table, sweating like a hog under the noon sun. He was a big man, not tall, but thick, built like the bulldozers he sold at his industrial equipment company. His handshake felt like he was testing if my bones would snap, and when he leaned in close, the first thing he said was not "welcome" or "glad you're here," but "you'll never be good enough for my daughter." No warning, no fake smiles, just a low, quiet voice full of certainty, like he was telling me tomorrow's weather. I laughed a little, nervously, thinking maybe he was joking, maybe this was some kind of old-school hazing ritual. But he did not laugh. He just looked me dead in the eye, like he was daring me to argue, to say something stupid, to crack under the weight of his judgment. I stood there, the words sticking in my throat, my heart hammering like it was trying to escape. My hands clenched so tight around the six-pack that one of the cans bent inward with a soft metallic crunch. I could feel the eyes of the whole damn party on me, uncles in golf shirts, cousins in sundresses, women pretending not to listen, but hanging on every word. Emily was talking to her mother across the patio and did not see it happen, and for that I was grateful. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to fight back, to defend myself, to tell this old bastard that he didn't know a damn thing about me, about how hard I had fought just to get to this place. But something deeper, something colder, told me to stay silent. Fighting would only prove him right. Fighting would only give him exactly what he wanted, another hot-headed kid not worthy of his precious daughter. So I swallowed it down. I smiled, even though it felt like razor blades slicing my gums. I said, "Thanks for the beer, Mr. Pierce. Smells like you've got a hell of a rack of ribs going over there." He narrowed his eyes for a second, like he was trying to figure out if I was mocking him. Maybe part of me was. He gave a grunt that might have been a laugh or a warning with Ron, it was hard to tell, and then he clapped me on the shoulder so hard I nearly spilled the beers all over his pristine deck. He walked off without another word, like he had already decided the matter was settled, and there was nothing more to say. That night, lying in bed beside Emily, listening to the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the distant croak of summer frogs, I made a promise to myself. Not a loud promise, not one I shouted to the heavens or scrawled in blood on the wall, just a quiet, ironclad thing that lived deep in my gut. I would never try to prove him wrong with words. I would not argue, would not whine, would not beg for his approval like a kicked dog looking for a pat on the head. I would work. I would build something so solid, so undeniable, that even if Ron Pierce never admitted it out loud, even if he never so much as nodded in my direction, it would still stand. It would tower over his judgment like a monument he could not tear down or ignore. I knew it was going to be slow. Painfully slow. There would be nights I would hate him so much it would taste like copper in my mouth. There would be days I would feel like giving up, taking Emily and running far away from this town and this family and this invisible war I had been drafted into without consent. But I also knew one other thing, something Ron, for all his tough talk and hard stares, would never understand. I had something he had lost a long time ago. I had the kind of stubborn, desperate hope that grows in the cracks between failure and humiliation, the kind that does not need permission to exist. I stared up at the ceiling that night, the fan blades spinning slow and hypnotic, and whispered to myself so soft even I could barely hear it, "You think you know me, Ron Pierce. But you don't know a damn thing yet." And I closed my eyes, already feeling the long, grinding road ahead, and welcomed it. Every blister, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt would just be more brick and mortar for the thing I was going to build. Because someday, not today, not tomorrow, but someday, he was going to look at me and realize he had been dead wrong. And by then, it would be too late for apologies. By then, I would not even need them. I would be standing tall on my own mountain, and he would be just another bitter old man shaking his fist at a world that had moved on without him. The fire inside me burned slow and steady, and if Ron Pierce thought he had broken me that day, he had no idea what kind of storm he had just unleashed. There is a special kind of humiliation that comes from showing up every day to a place where everybody has already decided you are not worth a damn, and where no one bothers to hide it because they think you are too dumb or too weak to do anything about it. When Emily first suggested that maybe I could get my start working at her father's company, I knew exactly how it would look, how it would sound, how every sideways glance and snicker behind my back would feel. But I said yes anyway because sometimes you have to walk straight into the fire if you ever want to come out clean on the other side. Ron did not even bother with pleasantries when he set me up at Pierce Heavy Equipment. He tossed me onto the loading docks like a piece of scrap, handed me a clipboard, and said, "Don't screw it up, kid," before walking away without waiting for an answer. The docks were hot, grimy, and loud, the kind of place where your boots stuck to the floor and the air smelled like diesel fuel and busted dreams, and the men working there were just as rough. Guys like Tony Big T Salerno, who spent most of his shift leaning on a forklift while making jokes at my expense, and Rick Anders, a wiry son of a bitch who once, accidentally, knocked an entire pallet of air compressors onto my toes and then laughed like it was the funniest damn thing he had ever seen. Every day felt like a test I had already failed before it started, but I kept my mouth shut and my head down, telling myself over and over that no one remembers the guy who whines about unfairness, they remember the guy who outlasts it. The worst part, though, was not the guys on the dock or even the supervisors who seemed to take personal joy in giving me the shittiest assignments. The worst part was when family came around, usually on the weekends when the company hosted some charity event or public tour to keep up appearances. I would be sweating through my uniform shirt, unloading heavy machinery or sweeping up metal shavings, and Emily's aunts and uncles would stroll by with their manicured hands and polite little smirks, making comments like, "Good to see Jake's working hard. Somebody's gotta do the dirty jobs, right?" Or the classic, "Bless his heart, he's trying so hard to fit in." Every word was a little cut, nothing deep enough to kill, but deep enough to bleed, and some nights I would sit alone in the dark with my knuckles white around a bottle of cheap beer, wondering how long a man could keep swallowing his pride before he choked on it. There were moments, more than I want to admit, when I thought about walking away, packing up Emily and driving somewhere far away where nobody knew our names, somewhere I could start fresh without dragging her into the muck of her family's expectations. But every time I thought about quitting, I saw Ron's face again, that smug certainty that I was just another loser who would burn out or break down, and it would light a fire under my ribs that burned hotter than the shame or the anger or the exhaustion. So I showed up. Every damn day. I learned the docks better than the guys who had worked them for 10 years, knew which machines needed special handling, which orders had to be double-checked because they always came in half wrong from the supplier, and which foreman you could trust, and which ones would stab you in the back for a free lunch. Little by little, I made myself useful. Not flashy useful, not look at me useful, but the kind of quiet, stubborn competence that people start to rely on without even realizing it. When the new hires screwed up, it was me they called to fix it. When a truck came and overloaded and nobody else wanted to deal with it, it was me rolling up my sleeves and getting it sorted while the others watched from a safe distance. No one said thank you. No one patted me on the back. But I started to notice a shift, subtle as a hairline crack in concrete. People who used to sneer now just looked the other way. People who used to joke now stayed silent. I never gave them the satisfaction of seeing me angry, never threw a punch or raised my voice, even when it would have felt so damn good to break something just to hear it shatter. Instead, I smiled through gritted teeth and kept stacking up small victories, tiny unnoticed wins that would one day add up to something too big for even Ron Pierce to ignore. And somewhere along the way, I realized something that maybe scared me even more than the humiliation had. I did not want their approval anymore. Not really. What I wanted was to build something so solid, so undeniable, that it would not matter what they thought of me because they would need me whether they liked it or not. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted them to realize what they had lost when they decided I was not worth betting on. Maybe I wanted to be the ghost in their rearview mirror, the one they could never quite outrun. Tell me, have you ever had someone look you in the eye and tell you that you will never be good enough? Have you ever carried that weight on your back, dragging it with you into every room, every conversation, every damn day of your life? I would love to hear about it in the comments. Because trust me, the weight never really goes away. You just learn to walk with it until it becomes part of you. By the end of my first year working those docks, I had bruises on my arms, calluses on my hands, and a heart that beat a little harder every time someone underestimated me. I did not ask for promotions, did not kiss anyone's ass, did not whine about fairness or favoritism. I just outworked them. Every day, every shift, every miserable, sweat-soaked hour, I ground myself deeper into the bones of that company. And somewhere, in some dark little corner of Ron Pierce's mind, I hoped a tiny seed of doubt had been planted. Maybe he would never say it out loud. Maybe he would never admit it even to himself. But one day, I swore he was going to see me not as the punk kid who dared to marry his daughter, but as the man who built an empire right under his nose and made it look easy. There comes a point when you have been grinding away in the shadows for so long that you almost forget what sunlight feels like on your face, and by the time you realize that you have become the engine, keeping the whole damn machine running, nobody else even notices because they are too busy leaning on you to bother looking. I was 2 years deep into the docks, into the paperwork, into the broken forklifts and miscounted pallets and last-minute deliveries that no one else wanted to touch with a 10-foot pole. By then, the supervisors knew my name, the warehouse managers knew my habits, and the drivers knew that if they needed something fixed before their truck rolled out, they better find me and not waste time with the other clowns scratching their asses in the break room. It was never official, never anything you could point to on a company memo or a pay stub, but slowly, quietly, I had become the guy they depended on when the shit hit the fan and nobody else knew what the hell to do. Broken equipment? Jake will stay late to fix it. Missed shipment? Jake will drive halfway across town to pick up the parts himself. Angry client breathing down someone's neck? Jake will put on his best battered baseball cap, shake the man's hand, and somehow talk him down without making any promises the company could not keep. But for all the fires I put out, for all the screw-ups I covered without complaint, the credit always seemed to float upward, like oil rising to the surface, landing in the laps of men who spent their days sitting behind glass walls pretending not to notice me. I watched those same bastards slap each other on the back at meetings, watched them raise their beers in celebration at company cookouts, while I stood in the corner in my sweat-stained work boots, invisible as ever. And I told myself, over and over, that it did not matter. I was not here for trophies or pats on the back. I was building something bigger, something heavier, something they would not be able to ignore forever. Still, there were nights when the weight of it all sat on my chest like a cinder block, when the unfairness clawed at my gut like a wild animal trying to break free. Sometimes I would sit out on the porch after Emily went to bed, staring up at the stars through the haze of factory smoke and wondering if I was just fooling myself, if maybe the world really was set up for men like Ron Pierce. Men who could crush you under their boots and never even realize they had stepped on something. Emily, God bless her, started to notice before I was ready to talk about it. At first, it was little things, a frown when I came home late again, a sharp glance at the calendar when she realized I had not taken a real day off in months. Then one night, after another company event where I had spent 3 hours setting up tents and hauling chairs and not even been offered a plate of barbecue, when it was all over, she looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "Jake, why the hell are you the one doing all the work while the rest of them sit on their asses and smile for the cameras?" I wanted to brush it off, tell her it was no big deal, but the words stuck in my throat, sour and heavy. Because it was a big deal. It was a slow, grinding erosion of something inside me, something I could not afford to lose if I wanted to keep going. So I just shrugged and said, "It's fine, Em. I'm fine. It's all part of the plan." But she was not fooled. Emily had known me too long, had seen me broken and bleeding and too damn stubborn to quit when any sane man would have walked away. And she knew, even if I would not say it out loud, that part of me was starting to wonder if maybe the plan was nothing but a slow death dressed up in good intentions. Over the next year, the company faced crisis after crisis, each one a little worse than the last. A supplier went bankrupt, leaving us short on vital parts during the busiest season. A disgruntled employee sabotaged a shipment and nearly cost us a major client. A bad storm flooded the lower warehouse and destroyed thousands of dollars worth of equipment. Each time, it was Jake Miller who stayed past midnight, who rolled up his sleeves and made the calls and cleaned the messes, who patched the holes in the ship while the captains argued about who should steer. Each time, the company survived. Each time, the people at the top got richer. Each time, my name was nowhere near the thank you speeches. I did not expect gratitude anymore. I had buried that hope a long time ago. But a small, ugly part of me still wanted someone, anyone, to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, I was the invisible backbone holding this damn place together. Instead, at the annual shareholders meeting, I stood in the back of the room while Ron Pierce clapped his newest golden boy on the shoulder and said, "Wouldn't be where we are today without men like this leading the charge." And the whole room applauded like trained seals while I quietly slipped out the side door, choking on the bitter taste of it. Driving home that night, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, I realized something important, something I should have understood a long time ago. They were never going to give it to me. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how many disasters I cleaned up, no matter how many late nights I gave to a company that saw me as nothing more than an expendable pair of hands, they were never going to hand me the respect I had earned. If I wanted it, I was going to have to take it. Not with fists, not with shouting or tantrums like some damn child. I was going to take it the only way that mattered, by building something they could not take away, by becoming the man they would have no choice but to see, even if it killed them to admit it. And from that moment on, something inside me hardened into steel. I was done waiting for permission. I was done hoping for recognition. They had built their empire on the backs of invisible men like me. But they were about to find out what happens when the backbone decides it does not want to carry the weight anymore. When people realize they cannot break you the easy way, when their words and mockery bounce off your skin without leaving more than surface bruises, they start getting creative in ways that crawl under your skin and fester like poison. Ron Pierce had a way of playing the long game, of setting up his little tests like landmines scattered along a path he dared you to walk, knowing damn well most men would never see the blast coming until they were already on fire. By my third year at Pierce Heavy Equipment, I was running half the logistics operations in everything but title, trusted with signing off on shipments, handling client negotiations when the bigwigs were too lazy or too drunk to do it themselves, and smoothing over the countless mistakes the real managers made without even knowing they had made them. It would have been easy, so easy, to start cutting corners, to start playing the dirty games everyone else seemed to think were part of the cost of doing business. A little fudging of the inventory here, a small gift, to a supplier there, a slight inflation of numbers when it made the quarterly reports look prettier. Everybody did it. Everybody expected it. And nobody, least of all Ron, would have batted an eye if I had started greasing the wheels the way the rest of the machine already ran on backroom deals and unspoken agreements. But I had something those bastards had long since traded away for their company cars and six-figure bonuses. I had my name, and it meant something to me. Not because anyone else cared, but because I had to wake up every morning and look at myself in the mirror, and I refused to become the kind of man who flinched from his own reflection. So when Ron started dangling temptations in front of me, a lucrative partnership opportunity with a shady supplier, an offer to quietly lose a few reports to help the books balance better, a promotion that came with a wink and a handshake and no paper trail, I smiled that same tight-lipped smile I had mastered on the docks and said no without saying no. I played dumb when he hinted at it, acted confused when he dropped not-so-subtle suggestions over bourbon at company parties, and let the silence stretch until it got awkward enough that he had to change the subject. It was a dangerous game, and I knew it. Turning down Ron Pierce, without actually calling him a liar or a cheat, took more careful footwork than a man dancing on the edge of a razor blade. One wrong step, and I would be out the door so fast my boots would barely touch the ground, labeled a troublemaker, a problem, a cancer to be cut out before I infected the rest of his precious empire. But Ron was not stupid. He knew I saw the traps. He knew I refused to step into them. And after a while, you could see it in the way he looked at me, not respect, never that, but a wary kind of recognition, like a man sizing up a dog he cannot quite beat into submission. The tension between us grew thicker with every month that passed, every project I saved, every crisis I cleaned up without asking for a damn thing in return. He hated it, hated the fact that he could not own me the way he owned the rest of the yes-men who filled his offices with laughter and lies. And maybe, deep down, he hated that part of himself that had once been like me before he sold it off for power and comfort and the cheap satisfaction of seeing men crawl. One afternoon, near the end of a brutal summer where shipments were delayed and clients were threatening to walk and tempers were running hotter than the asphalt in the loading yard, Ron called me into his office. The air conditioning was cranked so low it felt like stepping into a meat locker, and he sat behind his massive oak desk like a king summoning a disobedient knight. He leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers behind his head, and said, real casual-like, Jake, I've got an opportunity for you, a real chance to prove you've got the stones for more than just grunt work. I did not say anything, just waited, because when a man like Ron starts talking about opportunities, you better listen twice and speak once if you want to survive it. He laid it out for me like he was offering a gift, a new project, a big one, handling negotiations for a client we had been chasing for years, a client who could make or break our entire third-quarter earnings if we landed them. The catch? The client wanted things done a certain way, fast, loose under the table. A little creative accounting, a little quiet deal-making, nothing that would stand up in court, but enough to leave a stink you could never wash off if it ever came to light. Ron smiled that wolfish smile of his and said, no one needs to know the details, Jake. Just get it done, and there's a real future waiting for you here. It would have been so easy. One nod, one handshake, and I could have skipped a decade of struggle, climbed the ladder in a month instead of a lifetime. I would have had the nice office, the big salary, the respect, or at least the fear of everyone who had ever looked down their nose at me. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, the temptation whispering in my ear that I deserved this, that I had earned the right to take the shortcut for once in my life. But when I looked at Ron, I did not see a mentor offering me a hand up. I saw a man daring me to become the thing he already believed I was deep down, just another liar, another sellout, another piece of shit with a good suit and a rotting soul. So I smiled, slow and easy, and said, I appreciate the offer, Mr. Pierce. But I think I'll stick to doing things by the book. Might take longer, but at least I'll be able to sleep at night. The room went so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above us, and for one long second, I thought he might actually throw something at me, might jump over that desk and try to beat the stubbornness out of me with his bare hands. Instead, he just stared at me, the corner of his mouth twitching like he was chewing on something bitter and trying not to spit it out. Finally, he barked a short, ugly laugh and waved me off like I was not even worth the effort. "Suit yourself, kid," he said, already turning back to his paperwork. I walked out of that office with my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break a rib, but I kept my head high and my hands steady because I knew I had just passed another test, one Ron never intended for me to survive. And deep down, I knew the war between us was just getting started. He was not done with me, not by a long shot. If he could not buy me or break me, he would find some other way to crush me. But I was ready. I had walked too far, bled too much, swallowed too much pride to back down now. And if Ron Pierce wanted a fight, he was damn well going to get one. There is a point every man reaches where the mountain he has been trying to climb for years suddenly feels like it might just be a wall stretching all the way up into the damn clouds, and no matter how bloody your hands are or how raw your knees get from crawling, you start to wonder if maybe you were a fool for thinking you could ever reach the top in the first place. That moment hit me late one night when I was alone in the shop, the metal groaning and creaking around me like the bones of an old beast dying in the dark. And all the anger I had been choking down for so long finally boiled over into something heavier, something that dragged at my chest until I could barely breathe. I had been putting in 16-hour days for months now, covering for other people's mistakes, solving problems the executives did not even know existed, and getting paid just enough to keep the lights on at home and the gas tank half full, while the same men who laughed at me years ago kept getting raises and promotions like candy thrown at a damn parade. Ron, for all his talk about hard work and earning your place, had not so much as nodded in my direction since I turned down his dirty deal. And it was starting to feel like I had built my whole life around proving something to a man who would die before admitting he had ever been wrong. That night, with the flickering overhead lights buzzing and the cold smell of oil thick in the air, I finally asked myself the question I had been too stubborn to consider for too long. Was it worth it? Was any of it really worth it, if the only reward was a bigger pile of shit to carry uphill every day? I sat there for a long time, elbows on my knees, staring at the grease-streaked floor and thinking about everything I had given up to get here. The years of lost weekends, the birthdays missed, the mornings when Emily woke up alone because I was already gone before the sun even thought about rising. I thought about how many times I had swallowed my pride so deep I thought it might choke me, how many times I had smiled at men who would not have pissed on me if I was on fire just to keep the peace, how many dreams I had shelved because there was always one more fire to put out, one more impossible problem to solve for a company that would not even notice if I dropped dead tomorrow. By the time I dragged myself home, the weight of it pressing so hard against my ribs I thought I might snap in half, it was nearly 2 a.m. The house was dark except for the small lamp Emily always left on in the living room, a quiet little lighthouse waiting for me even when everything else had gone black. She was curled up on the couch, wearing one of my old flannel shirts, her hair a tangled mess and her eyes red from crying, and the sight of her broke something inside me I did not even know was still holding together. She looked up when I came in, tried to smile, but it crumbled before it reached her mouth. Without saying a word, I sank down onto the couch beside her, feeling like a ghost sitting next to the only thing in the world still tethering me to life. For a long time, we just sat there in the heavy silence, the kind that fills up a room until it feels like you are drowning in it, until finally she reached out and took my hand in hers, her fingers cold and trembling. "Jake," she said, her voice breaking around my name like it was a prayer she was too tired to finish. "You can't keep doing this to yourself. You can't keep giving everything to people who don't even see you." I opened my mouth to argue because that was what I always did, but the words would not come, stuck somewhere behind the lump in my throat that tasted like defeat. She squeezed my hand harder, tears spilling down her cheeks, and said, "I don't care about the company. I don't care about proving anything to my father. I just want you. I want my husband, Not some shell of a man who's been beaten down so hard he can't even look me in the eye anymore. Hearing her say it, hearing the raw truth of it, hurt worse than any insult Ron had ever thrown at me, worse than any disrespect from the men at the docks, because it was the truth I had been running from all this time. The truth that no amount of hard work could hide. I buried my face in my hands, the exhaustion and frustration and heartbreak crashing over me like a goddamn tidal wave, and for the first time in years, I thought about walking away. Not just from the company, not just from Ron's endless gauntlet of humiliation, but from the whole miserable battle I had been fighting alone in the dark. I could almost see it, a life somewhere else, some small town where nobody knew or cared who I had married, where I could start over and build something real with Emily without the constant weight of her family's judgment pressing down on us like a boot on our throats. But when I looked over at her, at the woman who had stood by me through every late night and broken promise and silent disappointment, I knew I could not do it. I could not leave now, not when I was so close to the edge of something bigger than both of us. Because it was not about Ron anymore. It was not about the company or the money or the damn respect they would never willingly give. It was about me. It was about the man I had promised myself I would become on that first brutal day in Ron's backyard. The man who would not be broken no matter how hard they tried. I pulled Emily into my arms, holding her like a drowning man clings to the last piece of wreckage, and whispered into her hair, "I'm not done yet, Em. I'm not walking away. I just have to find a different way to win." She cried quietly against my chest, and for the first time in months, I let myself cry too, not out of weakness, but because sometimes the only way to keep going is to let yourself feel every crack and break and bleeding wound and still choose to stand up anyway. When the sun rose the next morning, casting its pale, uncertain light across the worn floorboards and battered furniture of the life we had built together, I knew one thing with absolute, unshakable certainty. I would finish what I had started. I would not cheat, would not sell out, would not stoop to their level. But I would win. And when I did, it would be on my own terms. No shortcuts, no bargains, no regrets. They had tried to break me. Now they were going to see what happened when a man they could not break decided to take everything they had built and turn it into something they could never control again. After that night, something inside me shifted. Something old and bitter that had been quietly rotting away was finally scraped clean, leaving nothing but cold determination and a clear sense of purpose that burned steadier than any anger ever could. I stopped waiting for opportunities to fall into my lap like scraps tossed from a rich man's table and instead started building my own damn table, piece by piece, board by board, without making a sound loud enough for anyone to notice until it was too late for them to stop me. I learned everything there was to know about the business, not just the parts they handed down to grunts like me, but the parts they jealously guarded behind closed doors and financial statements written in the kind of language meant to keep outsiders confused and obedient. While they thought I was busy stacking pallets and smoothing over shipping errors, I was staying up late at night, studying balance sheets, learning contract law, figuring out how the real money moved behind the scenes. The money that decided who got to sit at the big table and who stayed outside shivering in the cold. I built quiet alliances, not flashy friendships or backslapping deals that would raise suspicion, but small, steady relationships with the people who actually made the wheels turn, the foremen who controlled the shifts, the vendors who whispered about better prices, the accountants who noticed which numbers did not add up but were too scared to speak up. I became a ghost in the walls of that company, gathering power in ways no one saw coming because they were too busy laughing, too busy writing me off as just another mule happy to haul the load while they made the real decisions. Every bonus I got, every overtime check I cashed, every tax return that did not immediately get eaten by bills, I scraped together and invested carefully, quietly, first in small things, stocks, a rental property, partnerships in logistics firms that worked with companies like Pierce Heavy Equipment, and then, as my understanding grew, in bigger things, things that connected me to the very arteries of the industry Ron thought he had a stranglehold on. It was slow, grueling work, the kind that showed no payoff at first, the kind of work that would have broken a man looking for quick results, but I was not that kind of man anymore, had not been for a long damn time. Then, like fate finally decided it owed me a favor, the cracks began to show in Ron's empire, tiny at first, but spreading faster than anyone expected. A major client pulled out of a contract at the worst possible moment, citing ethical concerns that nobody in the upper offices had seen coming because they were too busy padding expense reports and throwing charity galas to pay attention to the actual work being done. The market shifted, tariffs increased on imported machinery, and suddenly the fat margins Ron had enjoyed for decades shriveled up like fruit left out in the sun too long. Debt he had ignored for years because profits covered the stink like cheap cologne began to pile up, and it did not take long before whispers started spreading like wildfire. Layoffs were coming, restructuring was inevitable, and the king who had ruled his little kingdom with an iron fist might be facing a reckoning he could not muscle his way out of. I watched it all unfold without a word, kept my head down and my hands busy, acting every bit the loyal workhorse they still thought I was, while inside my chest something cold and sharp twisted tighter with every day that passed. I did not gloat, did not cheer, did not allow myself a single moment of satisfaction, because the real move was still ahead, and if I let emotion get in the way now, I would be no better than the fools who had underestimated me all these years. Then, one evening, after a long day of trying to explain to panicked managers why half their contracts were falling apart, Emily met me at the door with a stack of envelopes, her face pale as she handed them over. Final notices, unpaid invoices, overdue loan statements. It was worse than I thought. Ron was bleeding money faster than he could patch the holes, and there was no cavalry coming to save him this time, no miracle contract or secret handshake deal to bail him out. It should have made me happy. It should have filled me with a savage kind of joy to see the man who had spent so many years grinding my face into the dirt finally tasting the same bitterness he had forced down my throat. But all I felt was a grim, hollow sense of inevitability, like watching a building collapse after you have spent years noticing the cracks in the foundation. I sat down at the kitchen table, spread the documents out in front of me, and started running the numbers. By midnight, I knew two things with absolute certainty. Ron Pierce could not save Pierce Heavy Equipment on his own, and if the right buyer made the right offer soon, the company might survive, but Ron would lose control of it forever. That night, sitting in the dark with only the ticking of the old clock on the wall to keep me company, I made my decision. I would be that buyer. Not directly, not stupidly. I was not about to stroll into Ron's office and slap a check down on the desk like some cowboy challenging the sheriff to a duel. I moved carefully, using the connections I had built, the investments I had nurtured, the silent network of allies who owed me favors or simply hated Ron Pierce enough to want to see him knocked off his throne. I formed a shell company, a quiet little entity with no fingerprints linking it to me, and when the time was right, when Ron's pride was bruised enough that he would consider selling to a silent partner rather than face public humiliation, I had my men make the offer. It was not a hostile takeover. It was not a bloody coup. It was a slow, steady drowning, the kind where the victim does not even realize he is going under until his lungs are already full of water. Ron never saw it coming, too blinded by his own arrogance to imagine that the man he had once dismissed as never good enough was the same man pulling the strings that were wrapping tighter and tighter around his empire's throat. By the time the paperwork was ready, by the time the final signatures were penned, by the time the ink dried on the deal that would strip Ron Pierce of the kingdom he had ruled for so long, there would be no way to undo it without tearing down the entire company around him. And when the moment came, I would be ready. Not to gloat, not to scream in his face, or demand the apology I knew he would never give. I would stand there, silent and steady, the conqueror he never even saw coming, and I would take everything he had spent his life building not out of revenge, but because he had left me no other way to survive. The silent man who outlasted the storm, the invisible hand that rebuilt the empire in his own image while the old king fell to dust. And when it was all done, when the dust finally settled, Ron Pierce would realize too late what everyone else had missed for years. The man he had tried to bury was already planting his flag at the summit. And there would be no room left for him at the top. There is something almost cruel about how the universe will sometimes hand you the exact moment you have been waiting for, the moment you dreamed about in your worst nights and gritted your teeth over in your darkest hours, and then dare you to see if you are man enough to actually take it without letting all the old hate and anger boil over and ruin everything you worked for. Ron's retirement party was exactly that kind of moment, a perfect storm of pride, irony, and unfinished business so thick in the air you could practically taste it on your tongue, like the first drop of rain before a tornado rips through a town. The company pulled out all the stops for him, sparing no expense to throw a party so big and loud you would have thought they were crowning a king instead of shuffling a half-broke old warhorse out to pasture. The main conference hall at the fancy downtown hotel was decked out in white and gold, with giant banners that screamed "Congratulations, Ron," and tablecloths so crisp and white they looked like nobody had ever touched them. There was a jazz band in the corner playing songs nobody under 55 recognized, and waiters in black vests moving through the crowd with trays of champagne that most of the dock guys could barely pronounce, let alone afford. Every major client, every family member, every greasy little sycophant who had ever ridden Ron's coattails into a bonus check was there, buzzing around him like flies to a carcass, laughing too loud at his jokes and clapping him on the back hard enough to bruise in the hopes that maybe, just maybe, he would leave behind a few crumbs when he finally gave up his seat at the head of the table. And me? I stood near the back of the room, hands in the pockets of my best suit, not flashy, not expensive, but neat and clean and mine, watching it all unfold with a calm so deep it almost scared me. I was not angry anymore, not really. I had burned through all that rage years ago on the docks and in the loading bays and in the silent hours spent stitching together my revenge one careful thread at a time. Tonight was not about anger. Tonight was about finishing the story exactly the way it needed to end. The speeches started about an hour in, one after another, long-winded tributes filled with half-truths and cheap flattery, and every time someone handed Ron another plaque or framed certificate or bottle of expensive scotch, the crowd roared and clapped like trained seals, and Ron grinned that wolf's grin that had once made me feel like I was 2 inches tall. He was in rare form, laughing and tossing out off-color jokes like a man who had already decided he was too big to fall, too important to fade into obscurity. Finally, as the evening dragged toward its peak and the champagne had loosened enough tongues to get dangerous, Ron decided it was time for one last performance, one last kick at the dog he thought he had kept chained and beaten for all these years. He called me up in front of everyone, his voice booming over the speakers, his eyes glinting with a mean kind of humor that set my teeth on edge. "Come on up here, Jake," he bellowed, clapping his hands together like a man summoning a trained monkey for the amusement of his guests. "Let's hear it for Jake Miller, folks, the hardest working man in the room, and still somehow the guy who can't quite get it right." The crowd laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that cut deeper than any knife. Even Emily winced from her table near the front, her hand half raised as if she might try to stop me from going up there, but I was already moving, already climbing the stairs to the little stage with a slow, deliberate calm that did not match the riot going on inside my chest. Ron threw an arm around my shoulders, squeezing hard enough to hurt, and leaned into the microphone with a smirk. "I'll say this about Jake, he's stubborn. Takes a licking and keeps on ticking. Hell, if he had half the brains to match that work ethic, he might have made something of himself by now." More laughter, more clapping, more eyes watching to see if I would break, if I would finally lose the iron control I had spent 10 years perfecting. But I just smiled, small and steady, and waited for the noise to die down. And when it did, when the room fell into that expectant hush that always comes before something important, I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a small, worn-out gift bag. It was nothing fancy, brown paper with a little blue tissue sticking out of the top, the kind of bag you pick up at a drugstore in 5 minutes because you forgot someone's birthday, and I handed it to him without a word. Ron blinked, thrown off for the first time all night, his fingers clumsy as he pulled out the card tucked inside. He unfolded it slowly, his lips moving as he read the simple handwritten message, "Thank you for teaching me what kind of man not to become." For a second, he did not move, did not speak, did not even seem to breathe. The room around us held its breath too, the laughter dying off in a confused murmur as people craned their necks to see what the hell was going on. Then he reached deeper into the bag and pulled out a small, gleaming key ring, the kind you might use for a mailbox or a desk drawer, except hanging from it were two very important keys, one to the executive office he had ruled from for 30 years, and one to the building itself. Still not understanding, still trying to piece together the joke he thought I was playing on him, Ron looked at me, eyes narrowing into slits. "What the hell is this, Jake?" he asked, his voice rough and uncertain for the first time I could remember. I leaned in close enough that only he could hear me and said, very quietly, very clearly, "It's yours, Ron." Or at least it was. Until tonight. He paled, the blood draining from his face so fast I thought he might actually collapse right there on the stage, and the silence in the room turned brittle, sharp, dangerous. Because in that moment, even if they did not understand the details yet, even if they could not see the exact shape of the blade sliding between his ribs, everybody in that room realized the truth. The king was dead. And the man he had spent a decade trying to crush had just handed him the deed to his own downfall. Ron dropped the keys, the metal clattering against the wooden stage floor with a sound that echoed like a gunshot through the stunned ballroom. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but no words came out, just a dry rasp like wind through dead leaves. I gave him one last nod, not a bow, not a plea for forgiveness, just a simple, final acknowledgement, and then I turned and walked off the stage, my steps slow and steady, the eyes of the entire room burning into my back. I did not look back. I did not need to. The world I had been dragging myself through for 10 long years was finally crumbling behind me, and I was already moving forward, already building something new out of the ashes. And somewhere deep inside me, where all the old anger and hurt used to live, there was only silence. The kind of silence you get after a storm has torn everything down, when the only thing left is the clean, sharp smell of a world waiting to be rebuilt. The moment the keys hit the wooden stage floor with that hollow, metallic sound, it was as if the whole world inside that ballroom stopped spinning, like someone had yanked the plug out of a jukebox in the middle of the best damn song anyone had ever heard. Ron stood there frozen, the crumpled cards still dangling from his fingers, his face twisted in a way that made him look not angry, not proud, but something much smaller. Something almost like a man realizing he had just stepped into a trap built so carefully he never even noticed the walls closing in. People in the crowd were shifting in their chairs, whispering behind hands, their champagne glasses halfway to their lips but forgotten, their smiles dying as the realization crept in slow and cold. This was not part of the program. This was not the ending anyone had rehearsed for Ron Pierce, the man they had spent years fearing or flattering depending on how close they thought they could get to his wallet. I could feel every pair of eyes in that room stabbing into my back as I walked away from the stage, the heavy weight of their confusion and curiosity pressing against me. But I kept my head high and my steps steady because this moment was not about them and never had been. At the foot of the stage, I paused for a heartbeat, long enough to catch a glimpse of Emily, who sat stone still at our assigned table, her face unreadable but her hands clenched into tight little fists in her lap, the only crack in her otherwise perfect mask. There was 1,000 things I wanted to say to her in that moment, 1,000 ways I wanted to explain that this was not revenge, not cruelty, not some childish need to humiliate a man who had spent a decade trying to bury me under his boot. It was something simpler and colder, a closing of a door that had stayed open far too long, a final cutting of the last frayed thread between the boy who needed Ron Pierce's approval and the man who no longer gave a damn. Ron was still standing in the same spot as I passed him, his fingers white-knuckled around the card now, as if squeezing it hard enough might somehow change the words printed there in my own crooked handwriting. You taught me everything. Especially how not to treat people. I did not look him in the eye as I passed, not out of cowardice, but because there was nothing left to say between us that had not already been carved into stone by our choices, our stubbornness, our pride. I stepped off the stage, off the platform where he had ruled for so long, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of him slide off my shoulders like a yoke I had carried so long I had forgotten what it was like to stand straight. The crowd parted around me like a tide, people stumbling back, unsure whether to congratulate me or condemn me, their faces twisted with emotions they were too polite or too scared to show fully. Some of them looked at me with something like admiration, others with naked disgust, but none of it mattered because their opinions had stopped being my compass a long time ago. I could hear murmurs rising behind me as I pushed through the heavy doors and stepped out into the cool night air, the sounds of the party growing fainter with every step until it was just me and the city breathing around me, 100 windows flickering with life, 1,000 stories playing out in the quiet dark. I stood there for a long moment, hands in my pockets, staring up at the stars struggling to pierce through the haze of streetlights and smoke, and I wondered what the hell I was supposed to feel now that it was over. Was this victory supposed to taste sweeter, sharper, more satisfying? Was there supposed to be some grand swell of music, some cinematic moment where all the pain and struggle melted away and left nothing but peace? Instead, all I felt was tired. Bone-deep, soul-weary tiredness that no amount of sleep could ever touch. Because winning had never been about crushing Ron Pierce or taking his company away from him. Winning had been about proving to myself that I could survive the fire he had thrown me into, that I could come out the other side without losing the parts of myself that mattered most. And standing there under that indifferent sky, I realized that survival did not always come with a parade or a trophy. Sometimes it just meant standing on your own 2 feet when everything around you said you should have fallen a long time ago. The heavy doors creaked open behind me, and I heard footsteps, slow and uncertain, scuffing against the concrete. I turned slightly, enough to catch Ron out of the corner of my eye, still clutching the card, his shoulders slumped, his expensive suit hanging off him like a flag after a lost war. For a second, just a second, I thought he might say something, might try to claw back some last shred of dignity with an apology or a snarl or even just a word. But he didn't. He just looked at me, looked through me, like a man who had wandered into a place he did not recognize anymore, and after a long, hollow silence, he turned and walked back inside without saying a damn thing. I watched him go, the doors swinging closed behind him with a dull thud, and I felt a strange kind of sadness settle over me, not sharp or painful, but dull and heavy. The way you feel when you finally throw out something you once thought you could fix, but know now you never could. I turned away from the building, from the lights and the music and the whispers that would no doubt twist tonight's story into 1,000 different versions before morning, and I started walking into the dark. Not sure where I was going, but knowing deep down that wherever it was going to be mine. Not a hand-me-down life built on someone else's pride. Not a half-life spent chasing a ghost of approval I no longer needed. Some victories are loud and bloody and leave the world gasping in their wake. Others are quiet and slow and leave you standing alone in the night, wondering if you won anything at all or if maybe, just maybe, you lost something you can never get back. But either way, the road still stretches out in front of you. And all you can do is keep walking.